It has been said by others this week and by a good friend of mine, and this is something to think about. If this doesn't cause you to itch your head and make you think for a minute, it should. It's been said that audiences are our economic engine and contributions are our primary revenue. Think about that. Audiences are our economic engine and contributions are our primary revenue. Think about that implication for a few minutes. The promise today is that fundamental shifts, or the premise today is that fundamental shifts in the economy and civic participation are changing the way donors exercise their philanthropic impulse. That's the premise for why you've come today. Although I heard there's free cookies at noon. So I'm going to introduce our panel, and as I introduce them, I want to make sure that I start with with what you would expect a person who spent most of their career in the development world to do, and that's to thank our sponsor. The League is a relatively small organization, and the only way they're able to do the wide array of things that they do is because of the corporate and individual and foundation partnerships that they form. And having been here in Atlanta preparing for this conference, knowing the effort to get sponsors for individual things goes on all year long, I'm really thrilled that CCS is the sponsor of this particular session today. I'm thrilled because it's not just at this session that I've seen them. I've seen them throughout the conference. I've seen them at dinners, receptions, in the lobby, working with clients, talking with prospective clients. It's a really outstanding firm, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on them so that you understand who is not only helping this field raise more money, but has actually reached into their revenues to be supportive of our field. CCS is a leading fundraising consulting firm and management organization that works extensively with symphony orchestras, performing arts centers, opera companies, and other nonprofits worldwide to design and implement significant fundraising campaigns and programs. They are represented today and at the conference by Ray Happy, who's on our panel. I'll introduce him in a second. John O'Gorman and Kim Keller. Are they here in this session? No. They must be at the 40 and under session across the hall. I hope you'll have a chance to meet them and come up afterwards and talk with Ray. And they're at booth number 306, which is in the exhibition hall. So afterwards, it would be great to go and talk with them because they really are great partners, and you'll find staff members throughout our field who are either current or alumni members of the firm. So thank you to CCS for their investment. The last hour I read the biographies of our panelists in great detail, and without being disrespectful of them, because their backgrounds are impressive, I'm just going to tell you who they are, and if you want to fill in the details, that's fine. Needless to say, this is an impressive group of folks, so I don't want to shortchange them. On my immediate left, Mr. Chris Abele. Chris is the chairman of the board of the Milwaukee Symphony. He's the CEO of the Argosy Foundation and a personal philanthropist, and I think you're going to find him to be, as I told the previous group, to be the model of what you would want in your board chairman. Practical, passionate, generous, enthusiastic, buttoned down. Okay, not buttoned down today. Had all kinds of very interesting things to say in the last, and his experience is both national and international. And somebody asked a question in the last hour about some international work, which I thought your answer was very, very thoughtful. So Chris Abele is here on my immediate left. Next to him is Ray Happy. Ray is the senior vice president and managing director of CCS. He has a very, very impressive background. And I'm not going to tell you all his background, but just assume he's a very, very impressive guy. And on his left is also a very impressive guy. Did you really begin your career in Detroit?
Yes.
So there you have it.
And Parsons Orchestra.
Exactly, Ann Parsons, president, CEO of Detroit Symphony. Wayne is the director of music and opera for the National Endowment for the Arts. He's been there since 1997. Prior to his affiliation with the Arts Endowment, he served as producer of music programs for the Cultural Olympiad here in Atlanta for the Centennial Olympic Games in 1996. he has a vast and extensive background of working in our industry. In fact, I first met Wayne when I was executive director in Evansville, Indiana, and when Wayne was the president of the Louisville Orchestra, which seems like an eternity ago. So we're going to start with a question for the group and for these panelists. And remember, I'm going to reach out and ask you to complement these with questions. But this one, it has to do with this concept of the shift of the patterns in our economy and the impulse changing in philanthropy. So, Ray Happy, my question to you is, if fundamental shifts have occurred, how have they occurred? And how has that impacted your business in ways that were different 5 years ago?
Okay, thank you. Is that on? Oh, okay, there we go. At the last session, I gave a fairly optimistic answer to this question, and I'm going to temper that a little bit based on some of the things I heard in the last session. But by and large, it's hard to tell right now in the short term what the long-term impact of this recession will be towards philanthropy. We don't really know. Following the 1974-75 recession, giving as a percentage of GDP dipped down below 2%, where it has hovered since roughly the Second World War, into 1.7% territory. So it was depressed all the way into the 80s, and it did have an impact. We don't know yet how things are going to turn out. We do know right now that the philanthropic landscape is much improved, drastically improved over what was really the worst year we've had in a long time last year. And Giving USA was out last week and reported indeed there were significant drawbacks in giving. Giving was down about 3.5%, which in terms of the crisis in the markets and in the economy in general will take, but it certainly made for a very difficult year. And the arts were hit particularly hard. Now things have done much better since the beginning, I think, really this winter. And this spring, the economy seems to be building up ahead of steam. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what else will affect us. Wayne made a great point in the last section, though, in talking about one of the other issues we have to confront is the government side and those state governments and some of the pullback there. So philanthropy is going to become probably even more important this year than it usually is, which is central. And on that front, I am optimistic. I think that there will be, that giving will continue to pick up, and we'll have a very good year this year. And whether there's a new normal or not, I think it's too early to tell. There could be some long-term changes in behavior and changes in giving, but we just don't know. My advice is not to overreact to a new normal and to kind of retreat to our basics and fundamentals and doing certain things correctly that really we have to do if we're going to be successful at all.
Yesterday, the Group 1 and 2 development directors caucused in the morning. There were 17 orchestras represented, and I asked them a series of questions about fundraising in their shops and their programs, and took a little tally on a couple issues. So I'm going to ask you just your gut, what you think the answer is. There were 17 orchestras represented. How many of those 17 do you think will raise about the same or more than they did last year? Raise your hands. Come on, high. Wow. And how many do you think will raise less than they did last year? That's about 2/3, 1/3, isn't it? Yeah, so the 2/3 are correct. The 11 of the 17 will raise more than they did last year, and a portion of those 11, as they report it, will raise significantly more than they did last year. So one takeaway from this little session is that life's not terrible everywhere, and that if you think, and you're going to hear some helpful optimism from this panel, if you think that every orchestra is raising less money, you're wrong. You may be raising less money, but it's not everywhere. So the premise that nobody's raising any more money is just it's an invalid, at least statistically. How many of you will be raising more money this year than last year? Let's see that show of hand. Now that's a good room. I'm not going to ask the opposite question because that's not fair. That's really encouraging. That's really great. Bravo to you. All right. So, Chris, if this philanthropic impulse and the context in which giving exists is changing, which is the premise of this question, how have you personally and your foundation changed?
Well, I think just quick review, as everybody knows, 2 years ago, most foundations saw a massive drop in their principal and their ability to give. That problem was compounded for a lot of them, who give on a trailing 3 or 5 year average. So, for instance, if you have to give, there's a foundation I know of who had seen their principal go top to bottom down 46%. And yet, because they had to give on a 5-year trailing average, out of that diminished pool had to give an amount that further diminished it. So the net drop was, massive. And because they're sticking on that policy, like a lot of foundations, it's going to be low for a while. I think most foundations that are large scale and have been around for a while, rather than say our principal and our ability to give is down by X percent, let's take X percent out of the grants we make each year to all these organizations, instead said, and thereby ensure that everybody gets some pain, instead said, took a more triage mentality and just said, look, realistically, the most effective, productive thing we can do is to find the organizations that are most crucial in our eyes, the survival of which are most crucial, and focus our efforts on them. And it won't be because we don't care about the other ones, it's just that we're being realistic about things. I think increasingly you're seeing corporate foundations think that way. The corporate cycle has been an interesting one. Years and years ago, it used to be 1 or 2 grants to a few organizations. That started growing and really started growing in the 80s when there were lots and lots more nonprofits, and was fine for a while. But then the creation of new nonprofits exploded. I mean, until October 2 years ago, 5,000 new nonprofits were registered every month in the United States. And yes, there's a lot more philanthropy and there's a lot more money in foundations. But the net impact of that was dilution of product, talent, a difficulty for everybody in hiring good leadership for all of those. It disincentivizes collaboration and leads to a lot of inefficiency. If the downside of 2 years ago was a lot less resources to work with, the upside is a real good kick in the pants to start rethinking a lot of things that, all fields, and in particular ours, should maybe have been feeling more urgency about earlier. But I think foundations do see still symphonies in most of the Tier 1 areas, large foundations, insofar as they can, as a priority. So I think that's good.
Great. Wayne, how is today's NEA different than when you arrived 13 years ago?
It's a different place. Certainly, I had the great privilege of sitting where many of you sit now, and I was also at that time completing my role with the American Arts Alliance organization, along with the having served with several orchestras in various capacities. We were at the point of the end of the cultural wars. Can you hear me now? And therefore, I was part of the rebuilding team. I was Jane Alexander's last director hire. That's how she actually. I happened to see her later on, and I was in the audience, and Jane says, "Oh, Wayne is the last director that we brought on board for the Arts Endowment." But since that time, we've been rebuilding. I mean, it has to do in part with the confidence that all of you continue to make in your respective communities, and working closely in tandem with the League to make the case of how orchestras matter in your various communities. And as a result, we've seen the level of bipartisan support in the Congress like we've not seen in any time that I can recall. And therefore, the message that orchestras matter is indeed resonating. Now, the work can't stop there. It must be reinforced by the organizations and their individual messages. and that's one of the things we'll get into a little later. But I've also noticed that within the last 2 years, for example, some of the steps that the Arts Endowment has attempted to take with regard to this kind of dramatic economic challenge that we've all been faced with was with the Arts Recovery and Reinvestment Act. You will recall just a year ago, as part of the investing in our economy at the federal and state level, there was $50 million available to support the various arts groups. And that, as I can say, from the music and opera applicants, that probably was about 16% of the request pool, and it ended up being about 18% of the allocation. So on top of the $50 million that was available through art stimulus, we had our increased appropriation at the federal level of $167 million, which was more than the president had proposed. And I think it's an outgrowth of the kind of bipartisan support and the areas that many of you have made in terms of trying to make the case for support. But the other thing that did take note 2 years ago is that we had a year ago we had a 25% increase in the applicant pool. And for me, that was immediately following the art stimulus, which suggested the organizations were looking for every possible source of support to supplement some of the declines that they were experiencing. That kind of growth in 1 year is just it's not typical. We normally are in the area of 5-6%. This current year, we are so far it looks as if that number will be down by 9%. But in the aggregate over a 2-year period, you can see that those seeking support is at a particular high, and it's coming about at a time, as Ray pointed out, that at the state and local level, we're seeing that many of your areas have been significantly challenged. I mean, be assured, we monitor every state and significant local community in this country, and that's to support that we receive from the League and Heather's office. So we know the kinds of issues that you face, whether you're on the north, south, east, or west. We need not go beyond any other specifics. And as a result, the Arts Endowment support is strong at the moment, but we also recognize the flip side is that many of those who have historically received support from the public foundations, if you will, have been severely challenged. So we'll have to see what it looks like going forward. I'm optimistic that we will continue to make progress. It'll likely to be incremental. I do not see any dramatic shifts in terms of public support going forward, and it's going to be harder to be able to get the attention at the various levels of government.
I'm not reading my email. I have a worksheet of 12 trends impacting and around new giving. 12 trends and what they mean for the future. Trend number 1. Racial and ethnic diversity will increase in almost all communities at large. Trend number 2. Wealth appreciation in virtually all communities of difference will become significant. Trend number 3. The concept of endowment will face continuous pressure as new donors, from recent immigrants to self-made high-wealth entrepreneurs, enter the system. Number 4, interest in giving internationally will increase among all types of donors. Number 5, sending money home among foreign-born living in the U.S. in income categories from top to bottom will increase significantly. Number 6, flash giving, which is triggered by international conflict, famine, natural disasters, all unfolded instantaneously by the media, has the potential to engage and empower many donors and may become primary modes of giving for many. Number 7, donors will be increasingly attracted to self-formed learning and giving communities or gatherings that maintain connections, share knowledge, and sponsor events. Number 8, more and more donors will take care of all of their giving, whether it is flash or more well-sustained, with internet giving portals. Number 9, a more mobile population of all ages combined with out-migration from smaller towns and rural areas, and more frequent caravanning among retirement-age adults diminishes the appeal and incidence of place-based giving. You understand that? Less loyalty to home. That would be Atlanta. Everybody's here from someplace else. Number 10, giving by faith-based donors, long acknowledged as providing the majority of all giving in the U.S., will become even more complex to deal with. Number 11, donor demand for a streamlined, 24/7 customized interface will push donor servicing initiatives on the business operations side. Heaven help our websites. And number 12, people will increasingly expect to see themselves, i.e., people of their, quote, kind, end quote, in the leadership of the institutions to whom they give their money, time, or allegiance. So, Chris Abele, 12 commentaries. Some of those may be directly applicable to where you live and work and play. When you hear those, what do you take away from those?
Well, you know, when we had the first session, I'll say what I said first. I'll say what I said then. That the most striking omission to me from that list is women as a demographic, and specifically, you probably all heard that about 15, 20 years ago, women passed men in terms of percentage getting college degrees. I think a lot of people still think that percentage is 51 to 49. It's closer to 60-40 now. Every two male graduates at a college, there's 3 women graduates. If you go to most high schools in the country and you say, I want to meet the valedictorian, the student body president, you're more likely than ever to meet a girl than a boy. In fact, just earlier this year, the percentage of women in management in this country passed the percentage of men. Any bank in the world will tell you that women are a much better loan risk, much more likely to care about education, saving, and kids, and interestingly, I just was thinking, and as you said it, more likely to have loyalty to place. And I'm not sure, I haven't seen studies particular to marketing that differentiate marketing to men versus marketing to women and who's making decisions to the symphony field. But if we haven't done those, we should do those, because anybody who doesn't think this is going to have a significant and growing impact isn't paying attention. And frankly, I think this is a lot of good news for a whole lot of reasons. And the one other comment I think is donors increasingly expect to see a sort of ease of interaction with their with the nonprofit or the donee. I think also increasingly, and again, this may seem obvious, but you know, by behavior, how it's reflected in behavior, I don't think it is obvious enough. They expect to see efficient operation and delivery of the mission they're supporting, and they're better at looking for it. And again, there's opportunities for the symphony field there.
Wayne, when you hear those observations, what do you take away?
The changing nature of our communities is, and profile of our communities is something that is indeed being tracked on multiple levels. And in terms of how that informs the Arts Endowment's policies, I think an example of that is what's been referenced recently as part of an Our Town initiative by the chairman of the Arts Endowment. In a similar way that there are 2 or 3 other foundations that are addressing this issue of community engagement in a very significant way. this conference has embraced a number of themes, and one of those has to do with the nature of relevancy. If we push that theme just a bit and focus on the nature of interaction between our arts organizations and the communities in which we are located, is increasingly becoming a significant point in terms of how arts organizations, indeed, the nature of their work and their communities will indeed reflect the interests, the educational experience, and the lasting connection between those parties. I think that it's a great opportunity for our orchestras to play a leadership role in the likes of which we've not seen heretofore, to help define the agenda, to help define the priorities in terms of arts and arts education and how it relates to a given community, without compromising one bit in terms of the artistic focus, standard, the vision that you have for your institution.
Ray, I'm going to ask you a slightly opposite question, just to make it harder for you. When you hear those statistics, when you hear Chris or Wayne have said, in your firm and your personal experience, have you had examples of things that are actually contrary, or you are wondering intellectually if they're in conflict with some of those findings or those comments that I just read? Do you have some experiences that are counter to that and are at least interesting from the educational standpoint? Sorry.
Well, a couple of points. Let me give it a little more thought on the experiences. In terms of the trends, and something we did talk about the last session again, was the question of leadership and this proliferation of nonprofits and how this is affecting the orchestra world per se, and especially development. We talk all the time about systems in development and how to run a development operation, but to me it almost always invariably comes down to now is finding people to do it and people who are good at it. And it's absolutely fiendishly difficult to do that. And it's partially because of this large growth, and also because we haven't done a good job training people or organizing people. So the trend that I think most concerned about in the last decade has been really the lack of good development officers and the tendency of the good ones to not stay long at an institution and to jump around. And it's causing a lot of problems for us, and we have to think about a way to address it. And there might be even a role for the league in helping to address this in terms of leadership training. If you think about the leadership demands on an orchestra, when you think that you need to have a strong chairperson, obviously a strong music director, a strong executive director, and then two key people on the staff, the financial person who counts the money and the development director who runs it, that's a lot of important people to assemble in one institution, and it's very hard to get it all right. And on the development side, which I'm most familiar with, it's getting harder and harder to get it right. So that's a trend that worries me a great deal, and it's something we have to confront, I think, as a group.
Right. This is a brand new question from the last time, so listen up. So if you went to the opening session on, what is today, Friday, Thursday? Yeah. If you went to the opening session on Wednesday and then the follow-on session on Thursday, lots of talk, healthy, interesting, entertaining, thought-provoking talk about re-engineering, retooling, change. What was the other re-word that you used? Redesigning, a whole bunch of re's. After listening to these august folks at the last session, I summarized by saying that perhaps what we needed in the area of philanthropy more than anything was less and more maybe return to fundamentals. That the more time we spend navel-gazing about all the new and creative and innovative and and all those other adjectives in that class, the less well we build our philanthropic machines in our orchestras. This is just my premise. Could be fatally flawed. But in the possibility that it's not flawed, I would like to ask these folks, saying the word fundamental is great at conferences. Everybody says, well, yes, we should have fundamentals. I'd like to ask these folks, if they had to write the book, here are the fundamentals of a really well-run philanthropic operation. I don't mean the mission of the operation. I mean the fundraising, the contributed revenue support. What would you tell someone that you think are the fundamentals, that these are the benchmarks, the high points, the golden stars of what you must have to have a really great philanthropic operation? Fair question? Yeah? You? Let's start with Ray, since he consults with people for a living. His firm, I assume that he has a set of what he would view as fundamentals, and we'll start with you.
Okay, great. Well, I'll start sort of at the back end of where we derive our income giving, and talk. I think and this is a line. Tolstoy said, "All happy families look alike." I think all happy development offices look alike, and you can really see across them certain behaviors that are true. And so the place I would start with is stewardship, and caring for people who've given, and thanking them, and showing appreciation. And almost there are no good development offices I know of that don't do this well. And what development offices that are not successful never do this. And so stewardship, to me, is usually the first thing I look at to see how well a development office is actually functioning. So I think that is one of the crucial pieces. Two is of course, interaction with donors and developing real relationships with them about where you're heading, where you're going, and how they can help play that role and meet you as an investor, as a partner. And that means really getting to know how they think about things and engaging them intellectually. And it means also engaging and empowering the board that way as well. Fourth, I'd say creativity in terms of thinking about people who can be attracted to our work. We tend to go to some of the same people. We tend to fish in the same waters. I think we have to broaden that and challenge people and challenge ourselves. And then lastly, and these are not in any particular order of importance, but I think this is highly important, is telling our story and telling it compellingly and thoughtfully and intelligently. And doing that also concisely, but in a repetitive way. We have to tell a positive nature of the work that orchestras do and complete each year, the impact on the community, the impact on the individual. All of these things sometimes we take for granted, and we're not that great about talking about all of the positive things we do. I said in the last session that one of the things that kind of gets me a little bit crazy about our field is the excessive amount of hand-wringing, the looking around for troubling trends, diminishing audiences, financial problems. You can find all these things, but I think we think about all of the positive things that go on and the impact orchestras have, and explaining that to people, we'd be in a lot better shape.
So, let me repeat what I think you said. Fundamentals of a strong philanthropic program. Spending a lot of time in staff meetings. Hours developing the coding system for your database. Clearly key. I don't think I heard any of those things. That was sarcasm. What I heard is representing your case and having meaningful relationships with those that can make a difference, either could and are, or might and would. It's a combination of those things. But if you looked at most of our calendars, mine included, most of us spent meetings with other staff. So I now have a new rule where I'm working now. I ask Kareem, anytime I go to a meeting, I'm going to ask other staff members for contributions. They're far less likely to call those meetings. Chris Abele, what do you think? Fundamentals. You're writing the book today.
Sure. Yeah, well, I think, again, just, brass tacks, I think people overcomplicate the hell out of this issue. Just to put it in perspective, yes, I've been lucky enough to run a foundation for many, many years and see a lot of applications and look at the differential between them. I also, though, I've built a couple of companies, and I understand to focus on the bottom line, and I look for efficiency and I look for value, but I also help a ton of nonprofits raise money. I've spent a lot of time asking, and I try to just keep learning on both sides, and I think I've become better at both by paying attention. But there really are some really basic answers. I think, we joked the first time we had a phone call about this discussion about the fact that so many sessions on philanthropy are always the next new fairy dust tricks that are going to magically make everything much more efficient, fabulous, and better, and shower you with cash. And frankly, the simplest answer to how do I get the support from the voluntary support I need from a new donor or an old donor, the simplest answer is deserve it, earn it. And by that, what I mean by earn it is, get out of the mentality of what are the words I need to say, how do I have to wrap this up, how do I have to pitch it. And as Paul mentioned in framing the question, remind yourself that we do have a great story. We have an incredible story to tell. Start with the fact that most people you're going to be asking for money get asked all the time and lots, and so you get compared, like it or not, to a lot of other asks. And the goal shouldn't be coming in, I want to be good enough and I want to be better. The goal should be, what do I have to present about what I do that when I leave, they think positively of me, better about the organization, that I'm not just adequate, I'm phenomenal, and I compare, but I'm not, I'm not faking anything to get there. The way I said it last time, and the way I often say it about symphonies in particular, we support a lot of arts, but symphonies are unlike any other arts organization for a number of important, especially now, reasons, and we don't say this enough. People change their careers on average these days 7 to 9 times in their lifetime, and that's growing. Increasingly, you don't find people who spend the thousands of hours that it takes to develop the technical talent you see manifest when you watch a classical musician on stage at a symphony. It doesn't happen. When you do, you see virtuosity. Virtuosity can only be arrived at through hard work and rigor. So it's a rare thing to see somebody who's taken the time to do that and develop virtuosity. It's even rarer to see 100 people who've done it all on stage working together to present some of the most intellectually ambitious art that has ever been created. It's more compelling not just to do it because you clicked on your computer or your iPod, but you saw it with 2,000 other people live. You're not just seeing great art. You're not just seeing the manifestation of a whole lot of hard work and virtue. You're celebrating mastery of the difficult. And the reason we like seeing virtuosity in anything, in sport, in music, in art, because every time we do, it reminds us that all of us have that capacity within us, and sometimes we just forget. And when you do that with 2,000 people, and at the end of a concert, you're all on your feet, and you all have that tingly feeling going down your spine, you walk back out into the community, and you're a little more inspired and a little more connected, and there is no other art form that comes close to that specific message, that powerfully delivered. The economic argument, we don't make enough either. There's also no other art form where a higher percentage of the budget goes back into the economy that houses it. Other people bring in actors and artists. We have people who live by, pay taxes, teach, and bring up kids in the communities they're in. That's a huge impact. There's no other arts organization that, generally speaking, is as visible outside of the community and thereby useful to business for attracting and retaining talent than symphonies. And if it seems like this is a long list and there's a lot more like this to say, you should never get bored of saying it. I think sometimes we have this phenomenal case to make, and we don't make it enough. And if you're worried about seeming arrogant or entitled, you should, but you don't have to be. There's a difference between avoiding arrogance and self-assurance and pride. And I think, that line has been really fuzzy for symphonies for a long time. We've gotten away, I think, largely from the entitlement attitude, but not enough. I think there's still a lot of room to go. And back to the earlier question, changes in the way funders are looking at things. Now more than ever, it is important to demonstrate not just the greatness of your product, differentiate it from others, but also that you efficiently deliver it. Funders should be asking that of us, and we should be demanding it of ourselves. And if it isn't brought up with us by a funder, we should bring it up. That's great.
Tried to give him money.
It's €5, so it's not really that helpful.
That's right. It's getting less helpful.
Yes, less helpful. I said at the end of the last session, if your board chair doesn't look, feel, talk, walk, feel like that, because basically Chris and the Milwaukee Symphony are now printing money. They have an abundance. Is that true?
Euros.
Yeah. This is the man, the chairman of an orchestra, that just like many of our orchestras in the room are fighting for every patron, every ticket buyer, every donor, the community's attention. This is not an easy street orchestra that Chris is the chairman of. And if your board chair doesn't look and feel like that, get a new board chair. Or get Chris. Wayne Brown, fundamentals, either from your current perspective or your life perspective here for philanthropy.
Well, I think a point that is very clear, and you've heard the term now, it will be across the board, and it has to do with tell your story. But tell it in a compelling and inspiring way, and I think what Chris has just done is provided context. He's provided a organizational background for whatever that's the ultimate project that you're going to be seeking from a funder may require. In other words, you want to make sure that you immediately can engage the attention of your funder, and that story can then be applied not just to this specific funding source that's in front of you, but that's something that you can modify, package, and convey to multiple sources by making that a singular investment. Quality of leadership is just essential, and it was a point raised earlier by Ray, and one of the concerns that we're seeing is that not enough attention is being placed on the quality of leadership associated with the organizations that are coming before us. Make sure that there is a real connection between narrative and behavior. When we receive proposals from arts organizations about how great things are going, and building on a long several years of success, keep in mind we also read the newspapers. We also receive copies of the blogs, and in a panel, I make sure that panelists keep issues of hearsay off the table. But you need to make sure that we're current with whatever circumstance that you're facing. So we can be your advocate, whether that's the Arts Endowment or any other funder. Make sure that you keep your funders engaged and current with what's going on with your organization and your community. And the last point, because there is so much competition out there, give us a little inspiration to distinguish your organization from yet another.
That's great. Very helpful. All right, so now to compete with the previous sessions, some questions before I go back to my questions. So a couple questions from the floor. Yes, I'm going to start calling on people that I know. Yes, please, but you're going to have to go back to the microphone because the video and television. And introduce yourself, sing a song, tell us where you're from.
Tell your story.
Tell your story.
Is that on?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Ann Elliott. I'm from Duluth, Minnesota. I'm the development director for the Duluth Superior Symphony Orchestra. So we're an organization that serves the Northland in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and two significant cities that are on Lake Superior, connected by bridges. My question is, that I am very intrigued with the synergistic opportunities that take us out of the way that we normally do business to demonstrate to our larger community the value that we can in fact play. And the specific opportunity that I have that I want to exercise, and then I'm running against up to some walls, is to take $4,000 out of our budget and put it behind the Commemorative Air Force that is trying to fly again a PBY from World War II and land it on Lake Superior in order to bring understanding and knowledge to our community for young people who don't know our history and legacy. That is a population of veterans in an aging community that we have that are tremendously valuable to our symphony and who could be engaged in a way that would be meaningful to them if we reached out first with cash. And they have a publicity plan with no one to sponsor it, and I want to say, brought to you by the Duluth Superior Symphony Orchestra, who invites you to join us for a free concert on Bayfront on July 4th. We don't do any publicity for it. To me, it seems like a natural, but it means thinking in a different way. It supports what I believe is a fundamental principle of being valuable to somebody in a way that's meaningful to them before we ask and cultivate, or it is a means, a different way of approaching. And
so let me ask you a question about this.
What's my question?
No.
Oh.
You're trying to understand whether you want their opinion on whether it's a good idea.
I just want to say that to me, those are the opportunities that are challenging to us. And what do you think?
So let me ask you a very harsh, it won't be harsh toward you, but a very black and white question. Is it a way to be magnanimous, or is it a way to buy access or publicity or public relations? What's the driving intent behind this? And then I'll let them answer. I'm just asking. I won't even say anything once you answer.
My driving intent is to see two things that are out here in our community that could come together for beneficial good. That's what I'm interested in. I see the symphony benefiting from being able to reach to people who maybe have forgotten about the symphony or would like an experience with it, and who would say, I like those folks. They do more than play on a stage. I like being in the community with them. So I see it as a win-win.
Okay, so you're the CEO of the Duluth Superior Symphony Orchestra. She brings you this very thoughtful idea. What would you react? Who wants to go first? This can be random. Chris.
I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, first of all, just sort of disaggregating tactic and goal here. If the idea, and I think this is what Paul is getting at, is any decision around finite resources that any organization has to be informed first and foremost by a sense of not just it will have a positive return, but for that amount of resources, this has the highest return we could use for these resources. I mean, there aren't other options that would be more. So, separate from the idea of, it sounds like a really nice idea, and for the symphony, if you have a strong sense. If I was your CFO, I'd say, what are our assumptions about how this will get us more? This will lead to more donors and ticket buyers, incremental to what we'd have otherwise, or other options we might have at this. Does it have to come from our marketing budget? What are the sort of, but to the broader point, and I don't want to lose this. One of my biggest peeves with the field that I adore is a sometimes barnacle-like adherence to precedent. This is the way we do things. This is the way we've always done things. I mean, just because the bottom line brass tack drivers are always the same, and how you earn support, and that you need to earn it. The manner in which you do it, I think sometimes we miss the forest for the trees. We actually once, in our youth series, we had a huge speed dating event right before, one of our sort of abbreviated during the week versions of concerts, get young people in. And trust me, when we talked about the idea of hosting a giant speed dating event, there were members of our board who weren't overly thrilled, I'll just say, about the idea. But we had the first time, we had 1,500 people who hadn't been in the building before, and then they saw a great concert. And as I think we'd all say, you know, if we can get people into the hall once, if we can get people past that sense that, you know, it's not accessible, I'm going to be judged because I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of art history and I'm going to feel insecure, if we can get them in, see that there's other people like them, and then they enjoy it, I really like my odds at getting them back. And the broader point is, you know, whether it's that idea or anything, I think constantly we should be thinking, and much more aggressively than we typically do, for ideas in addition to and outside of what we currently do.
So do it or don't do it?
Well, as I said, I think another version of the CFO question, to be more specific, what I said is I'd want to know, if I was the CFO, what are your assumptions? But I'd follow up by saying, who else has done it? You know, and I wouldn't, if you didn't have the answer, I wouldn't rule it out. I'd say, well, let's go find out. Google, you know, dig around and say, what's similar to this? Are there things that are like this? Is it the only way we could do it? Is there a way we could do an iterative try that's cheap, see if there's some response, and if that works, then scale up? But that's sort of what my approach to any new tactic towards a goal.
Great.
I don't have much to add to Chris's answer. I'm pretty much in full agreement with him.
Here, before I ask Wayne, let me just so here it'd be, if I'm king for the day, which I really never am. If I get a call from an orchestra asking me that question, the first thing I ask them, do you have 100% of your board making their contributions this year? How's your middle-level annual fund campaign running? Do you have your sponsorships renewed? Because to me, there are 10 other things that have to happen before this. And I worry about all of us with very limited staff and volunteer resources. Sometimes we get in love with very good ideas, and our board giving never gets done. And our direct mail never goes out. And our scripts for our calling and our foundation proposals are half thought through because we're in meetings talking about 5 other things. A third-tier grant writer who has never met the president or the executive director or the music director sending in any ARI grants, doesn't know the difference between Bupkis from Shinola, and poor Wayne has to read all these things. So maybe you're all done with those, which I would be thrilled about.
I am, and I beat the goals. I've earned... I believe this. I feel I have earned the opportunity in my organization to say, you watch me.
Yeah.
I mean that. There are people on our board who are honored in our community because of their veteran status, who have the potential to give many, many, many more dollars. And we have every once in a while we have a golden opportunity to say in another way, you count. You count, and everybody like you counts.
So now you just have to answer Chris's questions. What's the then, and then? Because who can disagree with the logic of it? It's passionate, and you're obviously very committed to the concept. But you have to, anybody, all of us in this room, then has to take an idea we're passionate about and convince ourselves and everybody around us, what are the 2 things that if we spent that $4,000 on paid advertising in the newspaper or the television or the radio or whatever way, is there a then, and then? And if you can suggest that it can be measured, which at the last session we told the people that everything can be measured somehow, you just have to be intellectually curious enough to figure out how, then it's a compelling argument.
Okay, I'll do that on the plane on the way home.
Great. Bravo. Did you want to add to that? All right. Another question? That was an excellent question. Far better than the first session. Yes. Come right up to the mic. Tell us where you're from, what you do.
Hello, I'm Catherine Pullum from the Richmond Symphony. I'm corporate sponsorship and grant manager. So basically, if the money comes from an organization, then I'm the person dealing with it. My question is, increasingly we see foundations, corporations, even government support going towards program support and away from general operating support. And as a young professional in the field, I can see directly how this affects the ability of arts organizations to get the general support that they need to give employees incentives to stay, not only financially, but a career path. how do you contend with balancing or finding general operating support and programming when it seems that everybody is going towards programming and usually education and not general support?
That's a great question. Can't wait to hear these answers. Let's see, I went with Chris last time. Let's start with Ray.
Well, it's an enormous issue. I mean, even for the league receives so much money in programming funding, and just to run the operation of the league becomes very difficult. Obviously, that's where the membership comes in and under funding. So, I'm kind of interested to hear what the two funders have to say about this, because they will make restricted and unrestricted gifts, I'm sure. But of course, from the fundraising side, we would like we'd like the unencumbered funds. I mean, the general support. How do you get donors to do that? I mean, that's where your board comes in, I think, especially, and with your closest friends, and making the case for why those dollars have a special value that other dollars do not.
Mm-hmm. And I think also related to that is that we've heard at this conference the drive for individuals to be able to choose what they're supporting and exactly where this goes, and they want to see exactly what music stand they bought. So we're trying to appeal to people's need to know exactly what this is doing, and unfortunately the sexy things in orchestra are the kids with the instruments and the shining eyes. So it's hard, how do you make that case that the staff can be sexy too, There
are probably ways to do that. But frankly, you've got to get people to understand, the bigger picture, and I think that's a marvelous opportunity to talk to them. I mean, fundraising, when you're trying to really get people to fit into a certain box, like that they only care about education, I never find that to be quite successful. I think if you talk about the larger purposes and the bigger vision of the organization beyond what their maybe heightened interest is in one category, is probably what it calls for. I mean, we meet people all the time, in the university world, someone who is a philosophy major, the school wants to go and ask for the philosophy chair. It doesn't have to work that way. You have to explain to them why. I'm sure most people have no idea what the encumbrances are upon budgets and how that plays out, and how that either helps or hinders our ability to do the work.
Go ahead, Chris.
I think the sort of common approach to this, and I think a lot of donors and foundations are comfortable with this, is to address, in one way of addressing part of this is that you have a percentage of any grant for programming or otherwise that goes toward administration. That's not unusual. There are very few donors who aren't comfortable and we're going to really object to that. I realize there are some, but to Ray's point, I actually think sometimes this is a little overblown sometimes. I mean, I think, yes, tactically, it's nice to have as big a menu as possible if you need it, to give people as many ways to say yes, as you can. But I've had the strange experience sometimes of being approached by people who have a very specific idea of what they think I, as a funder, am looking for, and are even resistant sometimes when I say, look, you can label it this if you need to, but, I'm not a corporation. I don't need any leverage. Frankly, you put the name of the foundation, it's just going to get me more ass. So, in fact, I'd rather you didn't. Use it however you see most leverage. That said, if it has some legitimizing impact with some other organization, I'm comfortable with that. I think there's a little bit of a swing back the other way, but I think, just having the big menu and the upside of giving a lot of options without the downside of an overly burdensome set of restrictions on funding, I think it's very achievable, both through the administrative approach and, airplanes overbook all the time. Not that that's great, but, I think people accept that. Donors accept that.
Wayne.
Picking up on Chris's point that any given project, one can allocate a portion of the of cost associated with administrative allocation. But I would also say, from my point of view, it also comes down to taking the time to engage your funding source. In other words, those associated with the organization that you're seeking support. Because there may be avenues available that may not readily be apparent. I mean, if a project calls for someone someone to be brought on board for 6 months as a project director, etc., or a position might be reclassified for a given period, talk about the options that are available. But going back to the essence of your question as to whether or not there's any likelihood of being able to swing more support toward general operations, probably not. That's the reality, but it doesn't preclude trying to find creative ways in which to make sure that the essential costs that you incur can be captured in some kind of creative way.
So this is a struggle. Was that helpful?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is a struggle we had here. Is anybody in the room from Atlanta? Yeah? No. Hey, Janina. This is a struggle or a philosophical debate we had a lot here in Atlanta because it was very popular to oversell some programs at the symphony as long as it benefited the whole. So the education programs here were probably funded 5 times over, 6 times over. More? 10 times, yeah, 10 times over. And since part of our jobs as development professionals or board professionals or executive directors is to have enough intellectual curiosity to understand the unintended consequences of our choices, what happens is you teach a community that you're in this example that all you do is educate. Oh yeah, what we do on Thursday nights, that's nice and all, but we're only about kids. I don't think we can survive like
Right.
that. My boss here for a long time used to, she had this great way of capturing concepts and drawing them. And she used to draw this diagram that suggested that, yes, we do educate and we do community engagement and vigorously and spend a lot of time and resources on it. But it exists in the circle of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra, and if that doesn't exist, then it could be anybody's education programs. The program right next door is about a 16-year-old program that trains African American and Latino youth, spends hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year investing in them. But anybody could launch that program. That could be Sphinx, but it's not because it exists in the context of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And so this is where you went. This is the argument that I make as I attempted to try to help a community understand that if the institution doesn't exist, then the programs which you feel so passionately about can't exist, or they'll exist in a completely different plane or level. But I know sometimes that's theory versus sitting down. And I would say, amplifying what Chris said in an earlier session, having a relationship with your funder, individual, foundation, corporate, even a specialist at the endowment, this is why you have those relationships, to be candid about what is really needed. I bet what Chris dreads is someone that he thinks is trying to pull the wool over him that he later learns or already knows by vast experience that this is just a complete misrepresentation of what's really needed. Just come and talk to me about what's really needed. We may not fund you in the end, but I'll appreciate the candor. True?
Yeah, and actually I'd say, frankly, 2 things on that. One thing I said in the last session, if there's a declining list of things that everybody in this country is smart about, one thing we all are very smart about is marketing and hype, because 1,000 times every day we're taught, whether we like it or not, and we get very clear on what's authentic and what's not, and we have more than we sometimes are even conscious of, sensitive Geiger counter that gives us that little, oh, this is a bunch of BS here. I don't like any of it. And it's, I think it's a big issue. And unfortunately, there's this notion that it's more necessary than it actually is. In the converse, every development person ought to, as part of a class, go look at, because it's probably on YouTube somewhere, the first press conference Kennedy did after the Bay of Pigs. No one disagrees. Huge disaster. But in his press conferences, early in the era of televised presidencies, he did something that a lot of politicians don't do. He didn't pass the buck. He said essentially, look, I have a lot of bright advisors who thought this was a good idea, but I picked them, I accepted their recommendation, I'm the President of the United States, and I take full responsibility. And, you know, with the media today, if you want to guarantee that people keep digging and attacking and have that mentality, act like you got something to hide. But if you come out and you just say, and you own something and you're realistic about it, don't underestimate. I mean, never underestimate, not everybody, but a lot more people than you think's tendency to think, all right, well, that's the stand-up thing to do. I mean, it makes you credible in other stuff. And when somebody comes to me and says, look, you know, I'm pitching this education program, I mean, to your point, sometimes I like the opportunity to say, hey, wait, before you get into this, give me a chance to say, actually, I would have given you just the operational grant, because I really do think it has come back a little bit. I mean, there's been a lot, if you read the Philanthropy press, a lot has been written about, you know, the importance of general operating support, the degree to which there was this big drive up and seeking out program-specific stuff, and how that was impacting the always extant reality that people need to generate that operating support. I think they get that, and I think, you know, it's not. I just think that's much, much more important is the relationship with funders, and back to the, you know, don't overpromise. Come in and say, you know, ask for accountability. If even before it's asked, give metrics, even if you're not asked. I'm going to serve this many people by this time, whatever it is. But give metrics where you are 100% certain that you can get there, but you're 95% certain that you can do a bit more and sooner. So when you come back, you know, they're seeing lots of asks. We all do, all the time, constantly. And there's a real tendency in nonprofits to paint a big picture and, you know, to close the deal. But when you can say a year later, yeah, actually we were able to serve more people and it was a little sooner, and thank you. Foundations remember those people, and guess whose relationships build more strongly. And I think, you know, all that it takes to get there is just to be really disciplined about what that message is on the front end. But those are the relationships you can really build, and that's the way to sort of think about it. The place to be aggressive is the pipeline, broadening the pipeline. That's another peeve I have in development. Sometimes it's the easiest thing to do is go back to the same donors you have. And over time, maybe short run, yeah, you get to, you know, they'll say yes, but they start getting alienated, and it strains the relationship. I think there's this in managed development that goes towards goals, and there's this tendency to close. I think it has become an unintended impact. It's become less of a focus to always be developing and broadening the relationship. Go to that new one, potential new donor, ask for a lot less than you think than they think you're going to ask for. I do this when I fundraise a lot. I'll ask for a lot less. And I'll be incredibly grateful, and I will be 100% certain that whatever the metrics are, I can come back in a year and say I did more, and thank you. And I'm just rigorous about that, but I raise a lot more money doing that, than I do by overpromising, as tempting it is, and I build the pipeline faster.
So we have a few minutes left. I want to ask one question, see if you hit it with a succinct, punchy takeaway. Succinct and punchy.
You're talking to me.
No, you're very punchy. Somebody didn't sound quite the compliment intended. You have a whole group of leaders from this field. What's the one piece of advice you would like them to hear and take back home? The one piece of advice or a piece of advice you would like them to hear and take back home? I'll take volunteers for this. You want to go first? Ray.
Well, we talked a little bit about this in the first section. Don't be afraid of it when you're building your development staff to use younger people or any age people who don't have a lot of experience in development. Sometimes there's two kinds of experience. Of course, there's good experience and there's bad experience. And sometimes there are people out there with a lot of bad experience, and they won't help you get to where you are. We hire at CCS right out of graduate schools now, and we don't look for people with experience. We teach them the philanthropy. And philanthropy is something that people can pick up readily. So look for qualities that that will be beneficial to you: energy, hard work, good communication skills, good writing skills, and let the person think about the person picking up the philanthropy. I think it's probably important if we're going to help build these organizations around the country.
That's great advice. Wayne?
Do your research for all of your funders. Make sure that you're not proceeding with information that you may have picked up 4 or 5 years ago and trying to apply it in your immediate project for which you're seeking support.
Excellent. That's great advice. And batting cleanup?
I just actually build on something Ray said about development. I think, 30 years in the field on a resume in development is wildly overrated. Yes, there are some people who've been in the field for a long time who are great, but it is as a determinant, the predictive validity of that and success in your organization isn't quite as high as advertised sometimes. I agree with Ray. Some of the most effective development people I know have had very little background specifically in that field, but what they do understand is they're genuinely and authentically interested and passionate about it. Funders can tell the hired gun type developments right away. People who could be fundraising for anything and often were. I mean, I've had that plenty of times. I've had some development people who I've watched go through several different organizations. The thing they've got in common is they keep coming back to the same funders and say, hey, I'm back.
Regular appointment.
But the other one is coordinate the development department with every other department. One of the most common issues with development departments, and not just some of these, this is any nonprofit, is they start getting siloed.
Yeah.
They don't coordinate with other groups, and in the zeal to close deals, they commit resources and fulfillment that someone else and another department is going to have to do without first checking with them to make sure they've got the capacity to do it. Or, hey, here's a crazy idea. Hey, before you commit marketing to do something, ask marketing on the off chance that maybe they could say, well, being an expert in marketing, here's how much we could do, an idea that would deliver more and cost less. I can help you. But I've seen again and again and again these strange little islands in development, and those situations not addressed only get worse. Everybody on staff, everybody. I mean, we talk about the ensemble on stage. The whole thing doesn't happen if everybody isn't on the same script or, the same, sorry, I do theater too, same score. But in development, we're all on the same team. I mean, we're allies, not, but I'm sorry if it sounds like I'm being, sort of focusing a lot on this point. It's just that I've seen this again and again and again. And that is the responsibility of leadership, to keep reminding people, check in, have a series of, and to set that dynamic, that culture between senior management, allies together. How can we help each other? But development is where things tend to fracture a lot there, so coordinate.
That's great. Golden nuggets. Chris, Ray, Wayne, thank you very much.